Now here's a story you can never write, because you can never build the castle you want. So we'll take the initiative to see how this story of video game development unfolds. Castle Story is a real-time strategy game by Sauropod Studio. The game was funded through Kickstarter. They originally asked for $80,000 to make the game, but they ended up with just over $700,000. The game is available through Steam's Early Access, so the game is far from finished. It's an impressive idea for a game, so let's see how it's doing so far. I got into a game, and the first thing I thought was, how do I play? There's a small window that appears when you start a new game that tells you stuff, but it doesn't tell you how to do anything, so you have to experiment. The units you control are called Bricktrons. You start by sending them to gather resources, chop down trees for wood, gather stones from the mine, and then you can lay out the plans for your castle. The default block is the 2x1 stone block, but you can select different blocks by holding down the right mouse button. All the blocks are laid one at a time, so it's a very slow and meticulous process. When the timer reaches 0, a wave of monsters will appear. You have to protect your workers and the blue crystal with your archers and warriors within the safety of your castle. It's easy enough to do, when it works. Obviously, there's plenty of bugs to be seen. You have workers stopping in place, and there doesn't seem to be a way to get them to move again, except waiting patiently. This does break the game. The time they spend doing nothing means less time preparing for the next attack, and this also means protecting your Bricktrons from the enemy is impossible at times. You tell them to retreat, they just stand there in the open waiting to die. The features that do work, I do appreciate. I like the way the workers pass blocks to one another, working as a team to build the castle. I also like how you manage all the tasks and assign them to your workers. You select your workers, right-click on the task, and they go off and do the work exactly how you set it up. The problem with the game, I feel, is that it's too early for it to be on Steam's Early Access. Many of the basic things like pathing and the responsiveness of the Bricktrons are flaky at best. I noticed there are times when the workers are entering a mine, carrying out the bag, and then going back in and doing this repeatedly. Why are they doing this? After a little bit of testing, I found out it's because they're holding orange crystals and there's no place to store them. So they just walk in and out of the mine until you tell them to do something else, in which they proceed to stand there and do nothing, holding a bag of unneeded orange crystals. The go-to excuse is that it's an alpha game, it has bugs, it's missing stuff, and you shouldn't expect it to be in a playable state. When the AI isn't functional enough to get to the other parts of the game, you have your testers complaining about the same obvious issues instead of playing the game and finding new problems. Missing the basics undermines the whole point of releasing it early for testing. They don't need us to tell them that the Bricktrons aren't responding to commands. The kinds of bugs I was expecting to see are some minor ones like hit detection. For example, is an arrow dealing damage when the target is too far away from the impact? Silly things like units walking back and forth because they're trying to find the most optimal path to their destination. Even memory leaks I would expect, and judging by the stuttering frame rate after a few minutes, I'd say there's a lot of them. Performance optimizations are of no consequence at this point, but when a game is released to the public, regardless of the state it's in, bare minimum, the core gameplay has to work to an acceptable degree. I was unable to try some things like catapults or the multiplayer mode because I was struggling to build a very simple castle. 4 walls, a staircase, and an entrance. It's difficult to ascertain how much anyone can enjoy the final product, but we can analyze how the game will evolve in the coming months. After doing some research, it turns out that most of their progress in the past year was due to rebuilding the game from scratch. If you compare the present version to what you saw in the very first trailer of the game, you can see that very little has changed. They received so much more money than what they asked for in the Kickstarter, and the original engine was terrible for the new features they wanted to add in. Most of the work until now was in rebuilding the game, but from the perspective of the end user, that doesn't mean much. So the next few weeks will be all about increasing the playability, improving the pathing, the construction, addressing memory leaks, just improving the mechanics to make the game playable. You want the players to enjoy the game, even if it is for testing. After a few months, We should have the version we should have had now. Things like drag-clicking construction or command queues are probably a lower priority, so they may not be implemented at this time. The one thing they really should have by this time are in-game messages telling you what's going on. If there's any reason a worker is unable to perform their task, tell us why so the player can fix it before the next wave. As for the community, I don't think they'll be staying around for long. Most of the players will be gone by this time, but as they continue to work on the game and make it more playable, people will slowly return. The general vibe I get from the developers is more of an honest mistake due to a lack of experience rather than a malicious attempt at a money grab. Castle Story feels more like a pre-alpha build than an actual alpha. It shouldn't have been on Steam in its current state. They do have a disclaimer which listed the features that work or don't work, but the problems I've discussed in this video are not there. With its $20 price tag, it doesn't seem worth it for any reason aside from you really wanting to help them out. This needs more time in the oven before anyone can test it properly. When I do my follow-up in the coming months, we'll see how much this changes. Thanks for watching!